If you haven't met highly respected writer John L. Moore, your life is going to improve today. And that's a promise. John's written more than 10 books, including the much-acclaimed Ezra Riley Series. He's won many awards, and those were back in the day when awards were rarely handed out. And he's mentored more of today's leading authors than he will disclose publicly. So sit back and prepare to be blessed. Hi, I'm Patricia Durkin, the Christian Message Coach, and this is Marketers on a Mission. This is episode number 135, How Future Writing Can Help Us Portray Men and Women of Honor and Why That's Necessary, with guest John L. Moore. Hello, John. How are you today?
Hey, Patricia.
It is a real treat for you to be able to be back with us again. We're tickled that you are able to do that. And viewers, if you have questions now or later, would you please post them? Because if we have enough questions, then John may be back one more time. But this time just to answer questions, okay? So get your noggins working. This is the third time, if you haven't joined us before, this is the third time John has been with us. The first time, he explained that it's God's design for our creative gifts to become larger than us and how to make that happen. The second time, he taught us how to create atmosphere in our writing and why we need to write with authority. If you missed either one of those episodes, I'm going to share links after this episode is completed. So don't worry, I'm going to share it with you because we want you to get all the good stuff. All right. We will run over today. We'll be doing a longer program than 35 or 40 minutes, our typical time, and it's going to be worth every minute. All right, Mr. John. When we first talked, let me get back over here to you. When we first talked, you said that you were a leader. Well, I just want to start with two really simple questions, which are kindergarten questions for you. You said that you're a literary writer. What does that mean, John?
Well, I actually didn't know until I was about 5 chapters into my first novel and working with a professional editor. And when I got into this new segment, she called me and she goes, this is literature. And I had to stop and think because I thought, well, I have, lots of books on literature. And I just realized that, and it was a life-changing moment. I mean, we all have in our lives those kairos moments where our life is intersected by the Holy Spirit and it makes an impression on us. And you can never forget those moments. Mm-hmm. Some are good, some are bad. I mean, they're all good in that all things work together for good. But that really defined me when she exclaimed that. And I realized, writing literature or being a literary writer means you're artistic. It means that you're as equally character and setting or sense of place driven as you are plot or story driven. It means your characters are very rounded. It means that you have a very broad, all-encompassing type of message that's probably very pointed and very defined while still being broad. But essentially, what it means is art. Okay? You are an artist, you're a wordsmith. And it also means you write kind of books nobody reads. The old joke is that literary writers, are writers writing for writers. And I don't write for writers, but I understand what they mean. Because I'm writing for this writer.
Yes.
And I can't write anything other than that. I can't write a pot boiler commercial, kind of book. I just can't do it.
Well, we're glad. We're glad you can't do it. And that description fits you so well and means so much to you, doesn't it? That's very important to you.
Well, it's who I am. And without, for years without even knowing it. Because my first love was poetry. And I took a look at reality and thought the only way you can make a living as a poet is to teach poetry. And I thought, I don't want to be an academic because I'm too active, I'm too physical, and it would drive me crazy. And but my first love probably is poetry. And then I thought, well, what I'll have to try and do is, use poetic prose and, write more literary work. And you can do that in nonfiction. And that's probably why my features, have won awards and are so popular with people, is because I do weave that little bit of magic of poetry, art into them. And sometimes people can't understand or, what you're doing, but it's just through the use of the language and through meter, because the music of your sentences, and also through various forms like repetition. You learn how to repeat a phrase, not very often, but maybe maybe you'll repeat it once, maybe you'll repeat it twice, and that just drives everything home. Yes. So you can write anything artistically if you have it in you and you choose to do it.
Well, it sounds like you have it in you. Good. And it's been proven. A third party, a professional third party identified it, put a name to it, and it sounds like it hit your spirit and just confirmed what your description. You also were talking today about feature writing, but that's the second point. We have a first point before we get there. But tell us quickly, what is feature writing? If we don't know what that is, what is that?
Well, feature is featuring on a subject, and it's soft news as compared to hard news. And hard news is more factual. It's not as factual as it used to be, which I'll get into. And it's more event-driven. There's a news cycle, which is getting shorter all the time. Where a feature really looks at a person, a place, a thing, and features on it. And generally has a little more room, a little more expansiveness to write a little longer article. My strength is human interest features, would be the title. And that simply means writing about people. And I prefer to write about them one at a time,
That's a great line. Let me check, see if we already have some questions. Let me just check and see if we're having any activity. LB Johnson's here. Yay! Hello, LB. So good to see you. Melinda Inman is here. Oh, I'm so glad to see you, Melinda. Kathy Jones is watching from Michigan. Josiah Deegan. John, where's Wanda? He says.
Another story.
Yeah, it sounds like a private conversation there. We're glad you're here, though, Josiah. And for those who are joining us now or will join us later, if you have questions, please type them in, because if we have enough questions to fill a program, John may be back one more time. Woo! You say that feature writing is what we're talking about today, which is a great topic. But there's a groundwork behind that first. Let's lay the groundwork for today's topic by explaining why this is so applicable and how it focuses on previous journalism practices. Please.
Sure. I actually find this fascinating, and I hope that people listening do, because you need this foundation. You need history in order to have a foundation. You can't know where you're going unless you know where you are, and you know where you are as a result of knowing where you've been, all right, to a certain sense of that. And when I first sat down in a newsroom at the age of 17, I was shocked how strict the rules were, because I was starting to be a burgeoning long-haired hippie kid. And I knew I was creative. I knew that was my real gift. But I stepped into just regular newsroom, a daily newspaper, and found out there were rules. And I respected the people around me, so I thought, I'll follow these rules because I want to write. And if I have to follow rules to do it, then I will. And the main one in journalism was what they call the 5 W's and the H. And you started every lead with at least 4 of those W's: who, what, where, when. Should be answered in the lead of your story, in the first paragraph. And if you could throw why in there, that's fine. And then through the body of the story, you might say how. But you certainly had those 4 W's and maybe the 5th one. And that had been a rule going all the way back, they say, to ancient Greece. I mean, this has been a long-standing rule that these are the questions you answer. And towards the mid 70s. I mean, I was in that newsroom from 1970 to 1973. And I think about, as 73 was coming in was when people started playing around with breaking the rules. And some of that originated in the New York scene in the mid 60s with Thomas Wolfe, the contemporary Thomas Wolfe, not the Thomas Wolfe of the 1920s, the novelist. But this was the journalist, Thomas Wolfe, who always wore what they called an ice cream suit. It was a pure white suit. And that was part of the Norman Mailer, Truman Capote, crowd. And Thomas Wolfe particularly started writing in an involved style, injecting the narrator, injecting the reporter into the story, and being more descriptive and breaking a few of those 5W rules, which in magazine feature writing is somewhat permissible, and that's what he was writing for. He was writing for the New York glossy. Esquire was probably and the New Yorker, were the two heavyweights then. And you had certain writers, and they were very competitive. So when one starts a new form, then it was kind of, copied over here, and others got involved, and eventually came in a rather wild, drug-addled character named Hunter S. Thompson, who is known as the Gonzo journalist. And he wrote Stream of Consciousness, which had started with the Beatniks. All right, you go back to the 50s, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and some of these, you had just this stream of consciousness. You just let your thoughts roll out. And Hunter S. Thompson did that while consuming vast amounts of alcohol and lots of drugs. And, I mean, he was very talented and tough. I mean, just mentally tough. But that would have been well and good. It sort of then found its way into Rolling Stone. And that's where Hunter S. Thompson really found his niche and wrote a couple series called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is just like The Death of the American Dream, that's how it was kind of subtitled. It was how all the hippies like me were looking for peace and love and higher consciousness. And, I was also, I was extremely idealistic, but I was also always a reporter. First time I got stoned, I had a notebook with me, and I was taking notes. All right. So I was always a reporter. I mean, I filed a report from a student riot at the University of Kansas to the hometown editor because he had attended, hometown publisher, because he had attended that school himself. And that one turned into a police riot with many, even professors being beaten. And I was there. I was up close and personal. In fact, I was barefoot at the time, and I saw 80 stormtroopers, and you'd have to call them that. And I'm very pro law enforcement, but these guys had, full armor and batons out. And the state attorney general, who was only a few feet from me, says, "I'll give you 5 minutes to clear this street." We were on this opening to the campus there. And he goes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and went like that. And I turned, and here comes 80 troopers in a phalanx, all right, with their batons out like this. And everybody started running. And the slower kids, and the girls mostly, would fall and get, well, it's true. Yeah, they'd fall and get trampled. Oh. And you could hear then the batons striking their flesh and the screams. And I'll never forget that because I was pretty athletic and I was fit, 12,000 miles of hitchhiking, packing a 90-pound backpack. And so even barefoot, I was out of there pretty fast. And I can remember still the screams. The people being hit. And there was one professor that just stepped out of a bookstore, and he caught a baton right across the head and laid him out. And I actually used that riot as a scene for Ezra Riley, supposedly where he meets his wife. It's not where I met mine, but I tied that in. All right, now, that feature writing was fine to a point. Well, what happened was it gravitated down slowly into newsprint and into the daily newspapers, so that people thought, I don't need to answer these factual questions. Now, that was okay if you use one sentence up front as your hook. And remember, when you write a hook, think of the fish you're fishing for. You're not fishing for suckers and bottom dwellers. So never throw out just a bunch of rotten worms, because that's what you're going to catch. Always when you are writing and you're setting a hook, pretend you're fly fishing for trout. Treat your readers with respect. Use a light cast and a light fly and hook a trout. People overdo the hook thing. Now, they were you getting imaginative with a hook and then answering the questions, the W's down in maybe the second graph.
Yeah.
Well, they just got more carried away, and they all wanted to be novelists, and be creative, and wanted to be like Thomas Wolfe and appear in the society pages and with Norman Mailer and blah, blah, blah. And Ken Kesey, electric Kool-Aid acid test. A lot of this was drug influence. I mean, like Ken Kesey, if you're going to do enough LSD trips, it may influence your writing. All right. And I could probably comment personally there, but I'll go on. Okay. So you have it beginning to filter down. Now, about this time, as I take my leave of absence from the newspaper, and I'm hitchhiking all around, at one point, I'll bring up, I think it was Barstow or San Bernardino, but one of those two terribly hot, dry places, there were like 30 of us hitchhikers on one exit ramp. You couldn't get up on the interstate. You had to hitchhike from the ramps. And some were SDS members just back from a big demonstration/riot in Washington, D.C., and they were hitchhiking home to UCLA or, Berkeley, these places. And so I'd be sitting on an exit ramp with, 20, 25 SDS members and other student radicals and stuff. And none of them were the big leaders. I don't think they were hitchhiking. And just listening to them and everything. And what happened, though, is all of these characters who didn't know what they wanted to do, along came Watergate. And Watergate toppled their number one enemy, Richard Nixon. And that so excited them because they made him into just an icon, a negative icon. And after I got married in 1974, my bride and I were traveling, drifting around, and I thought I'd like to work for a small paper again. And I stopped in, I don't even remember the community, but it was in Nevada, and it was a town about the size of Miles City, where I live. And the paper had gone to bed, as we say, so the editor was free. And I talked to him in his office, and I told him about my experience, my credentials as a journalist. And he looked at me, and he was a really nice, trim-fit guy in his 40s. A lot of these journalists aren't.
Shall we say?
There's kind of a burnout crowd always, associated with newsrooms. But anyway, he looked at me and he said, "You left journalism at the wrong time." He said, "Ever since Watergate, all the radicals have flooded the J schools." He says, "I'm inundated with job seekers." So all of these radicals that I've been sitting with on all these exit ramps, one time a flatbed truck came by and picked up all of us. And we went across the desert into Arizona. 30 of us on a flatbed truck, a couple of guitars playing, and strange little lights being passed back and forth. I'm not sure what all that was. But anyway, I knew that all those hippie friends of mine had flooded into J schools because they thought they could bring down their Nixon. See, that's where they were going to make a social change. Now, remember from my last talk, I said after World War II, basically Christians developed a bomb shelter mentality, went into the church and closed the door. All right. And they thought, if we don't get raptured tomorrow, it'll be the day after. Okay. So they neglected society. They neglected culture. Well, it was wide open because, as we know, nature abhors a vacuum. Well, supernature, the supernatural, abhors a vacuum. You take something out of the supernatural realm, like the absence of the Christian influence, the enemy rushes in like a flood. All right? And that's what happened. Christians retreated. The whole counterculture rushed in. So when that editor said that to me, I had one of those, it wouldn't be an epiphany, but it was one of those times where destiny and your life just collide at an intersection, because I knew what he was saying. And I knew that if I wanted to continue as a journalist, I'd have to get right back in it right away, or go back to school and get my degree, or do something, because I was already behind. And I thought, well, my goal actually is to be a novelist. So it's not that important, but I remember being struck by a strong sense of sadness, because I thought journalism, the few years I was in it, I'll never see again. And that's true. That is actually true. And working with journalists in various forms, because I've worked PR, and sometimes even as a historian, whatever. I mean, I'll have to deal with journalists. And I can tell, there's a huge change from when I was 17, 18, 19 years old. And it hasn't been for the good. Now.
Can you hold on? Hold on. Can you hold that thought? Let me check Facebook. Okay, he's going to take a drink. I'm going to check Facebook, and we're going to move right on. Let's see here. Melinda Inman says, that's really true. Journalists seem to have no compunction to deal with the truth any longer. Kathy Jones says, this is really good. Of course, you already knew that was going to happen when you got here, didn't you, Kathy? Melinda, again, remove the Christian influence, and the countercultural took over. And also she says that was really unfortunate. The church retreated when it needed to advance. These are topics, you don't know Melinda yet, John, but these are topics that I know her very well, and these topics are very near her heart. Very near her heart. Y'all would be good pals. Excuse me. And for everyone who's watching, I'm seeing 14, I'm being told there's 14 comments, and I can see 5. Let me check really quickly and see if I can see more over here. What I wanted to tell you, viewers, is that please feel free to ask any questions that you want to now during the live show or after when you're watching the replay. And those questions can be anything about writing that John can go very broad, not just exclusively about today's topic, as we're looking to gather enough questions from you viewers from on any of the topics that we've already talked about, or other writing questions, so that he can come back with a question and answer session. Okay, so feel free to turn those questions in. All right, thank you, John.
Okay, now where did this all devolve? About 20 years ago, maybe 25 now, there was a poll taken of working journalists, and it was learned that only 8% regularly attended any type of house of worship, not just Christian, but 8% only regularly attended any type of worship service. And that was 25 some years ago, at least, because I remember that very clearly. So obviously we've pushed back, we've pushed down, we're just getting worse. But my point is that the church always kind of in this bomb shelter mentality, once it comes out and it sees what's going on, it has taken so long to catch up, and it often catches up, fails to catch up because it copies what it's chasing.
So true.
All right. Now, what we see and what I see in journalists and have for some time is a fascination with the cynical. All right. They love being cynical. And somehow they think that's one of the 5 W's. But somehow being cynical gives you a more critical mind. Well, what it really shows is your bias.
Yes.
And most of this, I think, was caused in the original root by distant fathers after World War II. All right, because the fathers came home, shell-shocked, exhausted and everything, and they sent mom and the kids to church. And it was that baby boomer generation that gave birth to the counterculture. And it was, as I sat on those freeway ramps and talked with SDS people, or when I visited communes and dealt with these top, type gurus, I found out they all had father issues of some sort. They were all in, just rebellion, because revolution is essentially rebellion. Yeah. And the Bible tells us that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. So we actually had a brooding witchcraft, going into the country. Going, in the sense of all this rebel against authority. which I was a great, example of until I came to the Lord, in 1973. But all of this, all of this new type of journalism finally makes its way down to the local papers, the small dailies, the weekly type papers, because everybody now wants to be Woodard and Bernstein.
Yes.
The two Washington Post reporters who supposedly brought down Nixon. That was everybody's idea. And so they're going to approach everything cynically. No matter who they're interviewing, he's a bad guy, and I am going to bring him down because I'm a hero. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to write the story that's going to advance my career. Whereas in the 12 essentials of journalism, an actual list of the 12, essentials of journalism, number one is the truth. All right. That's number one. And that was being neglected. Now they did another thing. We as Christians understand biblically logos and rhema, the written word of God, the inspired word of God that speaks to us. So they began playing with truth and altering it. And if you caught them at it, they say, well, I'm operating in the spirit of it.
Yeah.
This fact isn't, there's truth and then there's facts, and my truth is bigger than these facts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they began kind of weaving stuff in. And the other thing they began doing, and oh, good grief, you see it everywhere. I can't hardly read a sports article, just a story, a report, without going 5 paragraphs down to get the basic information. Because all of these people want to be novelists. Well, they should just quit their job and go try being one instead of putting it in the paper and trying to sell it to you and sell. So an example, and this will be some hyperbole, but a few years ago, I read a report following the Kentucky Derby. And I mean, it was literally like, the dawn strayed golden fingers against the sunlit barns, and the dew sparkled on the grass like diamonds as the groom and the trainer looked at their charge, wondering about the crack in the hoof. But hours later, 2,000 pounds of bay rage burst from the gates. And I read that and I was like, it was about, and this was from a major newspaper that was circulated, by AP or whatever, all over the country. And what struck me was the whole idiocy, of the writing. Obviously, somebody who didn't even know what she was writing about and was only interested about her. It was all about her. But also a factual mistake. No racehorse ever weighed 2,000 pounds. Ever. No racehorse could run in the Kentucky Derby. Those horses are boiled down, trim and hard to about 1,050 pounds. They might be 1,200, 1,300 after a couple of years of rest. But I mean, they're the trim, fit athletes weighing, maybe 1,150. Maybe a really big one might weigh a very fit 1,200 pounds. But she had it, 1 ton of raging bay horseflesh. And people that don't know bull riding, and they're covering the PBR or, or the local rodeo, same thing. A ton of angry bull bursts from, no. Most of these bulls weigh anywhere from 1,400 to about 1,700 pounds. The rare one will get up there in that 1,900 pound range. But they don't even know, but they don't care.
Yeah.
Because it's all about them. Now, my fear and concern is Christian writers are beginning to follow this too much. Because, again, they're following the world, all right? And they don't have anybody teaching them. Really, I mean, I'm sure in some of the better Christian schools there might be, but for the most part, now for our Bible lesson for the day, if you'll turn in your iPhone to 2 Timothy 3, all right, it says, in the last days, perilous times shall come, and men will become lovers of selfies. And that to me epitomizes it. Now you can read the next 7, 8 verses, and it describes where we are, and sadly describes where the church is. Largely lovers of pleasure, lovers of money, idle women being seduced in the homes, and all of this. But here I'm going to make a kind of a strong statement, and but I want to shock people a little, but I'm not saying this purely for effect because I believe it. I think the Christian writing world, for the most part, and again, I'm speaking generally, I'm not talking about everybody because there's plenty of servants out there.
Yes.
But a lot of them, especially the young writers trying to break in, are guilty of writing literary selfies. Okay? They've got like the camera up in front of themselves all the time. This is about me. This is about me. This is about me. This is my blog. You know, this is what I did today. This is, you know, it's all coming out of who they are. It may be opinion, which is fine if you have an informed opinion.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I've written plenty of editorials. You know, I understand opinion writing, but you need to have an informed opinion, first of all.
Yes.
It may be your, you know, a Facebook page of, you know, whatever it is. It may be a devotional. And I'm not, as you know, a big fan of those. And those people who write them, God bless you. But I've given scores of Bibles away in my ministry. I've never given a single devotional away. All right. And I've had a couple of pretty good ones. But what I'm saying is don't settle for things that just really are reflective of you looking at you. That's why I'm going to stress, you know, feature writing and getting your eyes off yourself.
But don't you agree, John, that that a lot of people who are coming in, particularly that group of people who are coming into that field, we are taught from time immemorial in whatever arena we're in to follow the leaders. Look what the leaders are doing and do that or do something very similar. Now, that doesn't remove any responsibility from us. We're still responsible for our actions and our words and our strategy and so forth. But it's an easy, it can feel right to follow the leader.
Okay, let's get to a key word, which is largely missing, I think, in the body of Christ, and that's discernment. What leader are you following? Are you following the Pied Piper? Are you going right off a cliff? I mean, we are in a time of 5 wise and 5 foolish virgins. All right. So we really better understand if we're listening to an alarm clock or if we're listening to some little fable to help keep us sleeping, keep us asleep. Okay.
Yes. Well
now,
said.
Why not be a leader?
Yes.
I mean, what's all this? And I'm not talking rebellion here. I'm talking about if you're a Christian and you, first of all, you need a lot of engrafted word. We don't need many, you know, we don't need leaders that don't have much engrafted word in their hearts and lives. All right. Then you should be leading and you should be setting the example biblically.
Yes.
All right. The Bible's your leader. Okay. So you take, you know, John and Matthew, Luke, James, all of them, and take them, let them be your leaders. But getting back to features, I have a very popular Facebook page for my writing, and I've actually dropped back on it a lot. But it went from about 1,000 followers is all to 17,500. And then since then, I realized it was consuming too much of my time, and I wasn't going to get my next novel done. So I've really dropped that. But what was the cause of that big jump? Was I began writing features that were largely historical, largely regional, but in many cases all across the American West, and really exposing and honoring people that did not normally get honored. And this thing just took off. I mean, the problem is you don't make any money doing something like this. So one part of the series, the 30-part series I did on the FUF Ranch, will become a book eventually. I mean, there's just such a demand. I got a phone call the other day, and this friend of mine said she had talked to the woman who was the new editor at a paper that printed all 30, you know, one a week for 30 weeks. And she had people coming in and buying, you know, extra copies. Each issue was like selling out.
Wow.
Because people love regional history, and they love hearing about people that are largely neglected, because only the big stuff. I mean, I've never really written and studied, written about the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Custer's Last Stand, because everybody else does. I'd have to be competing against people that are obsessed with it. So I write about things that are lesser known, but still pretty incredible, like the FUF Ranch. 15,000 horses on 1.1 million acres, and the cowboys included a freed slave, a famous Western artist, a famous Western author, and a famous Western cowboy poet whose poem became a song that was the #1 seller in the early 1920s. All of those on one ranch.
Wow.
All right.
Wow.
Plus everything else that goes with that. And it really became something. Now, what I found about doing that, I love honoring people.
Yes.
I love it. Don't glorify them. That's where the journalist in me comes out. I don't glorify it. They all have warts. They all have wrinkles. Nobody's perfect out there. But I just take this terrible little temporary spotlight that we all walk around with, and instead of putting it on me and saying, this is me, this is what I'm doing, this is what I think, I just began putting it out and about and looking, researching, digging through regional history books, things like this, because almost every county has one. Somebody somewhere put together a collection of the early settlers, the early pioneers, and you just sit down and you read those and read them, and you find things, and then you trace that to somewhere else, and then to somewhere else. What has been such a blessing about that page is how many people reconnected because of little old me. All right? I could be sitting at home self-focused on my novel and think, oh my God, will I ever get this done? Who's going to publish it? I've had nothing but bad luck. God, you're really against me. It's all me, me, me. All right? It's all narcissism. All right? And Christians aren't immune from it. It's out there. But by focusing outside of me and writing about other people, I would read the comments, after some of these posts, and one distant relative finds another distant relative because of me. One woman found her babysitter from when she was a child because of me. Or old friends who had lost touch found themselves there because of that common interest. And the heartfelt letters and notes that I got. I mean, one guy recently, and this was hyperbole on his part, but I mean, I hadn't posted for quite a while, and I posted something again, and he just thanked me. He says, you make my life worth living. Now, there's a point to all of that mainstream media doesn't understand. They don't understand middle America, and they certainly don't understand rural America. But our values are being just tromped on all the time and treated like nothing. And those who are really holding to those values do not have a spokesman. They don't have anybody rising up and saying anything. And I've encouraged young people to, go into journalism, young, rural type kids. And one or two might go into journalism, but it's an ag paper, agriculture paper, or it's an ag broadcasting system. They don't go into the secular realm, and I understand why, all right? It would be a hostile environment for them.
Sure.
They would probably just be either beaten to death or changed, radically changed. But for them to come into a newsroom and be a rural kid, rural values, and these rural values are slipping all the time too. But it would just be a hostile environment. And so I understand. So what can be done? One thing that can be done is Christian writers should do a tithe on their writing. All your writing is about you and for you. Why not do something pro bono? Why not say, I'm going to take some time and find somebody interesting and write about them? I might put it on my blog, my webpage. Maybe I'll approach the pastor and just see if we can print these on the back of the church bulletin. Maybe there's a paper that'll hire me. A lot of these small town papers are desperate. My local paper has been advertising for reporters for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and they're obviously not getting anybody, all right? So I know there's other papers out there, and as I was trained for a smaller paper, say in communities from 5,000 to 50,000 people, circulations that are ranging in 1,000 to 20,000. The heartbeat of the paper is the local human interest feature. People want to know about their people, their community. They want to know about their whole neighborhood, who's in that neighborhood. There is no reason that all these small papers should be running national news from wire services. It's ridiculous, and it's killing them, but they can't seem to figure it out. So you might be able to walk right into a small, weekly or a daily and say, I would really like to do a feature or two and have an idea in mind, all right, and pitch it to them. And be ready to settle for only $25, because be ready to do it for nothing. Do it unto the Lord. Tithe on your talent. Give out of your talent. It's not all about us, you, me, okay? If you're a professional, like a lawyer, you can do a few things pro bono.
Right.
You can do a few things for the community. In my case, for certain reasons, busyness being one of them, I can't get as involved in the community here as I would like. I just can't do it. And there's something going on all the time in these small towns. Benefits. All right, see, the small town, you have community, and if somebody has medical bills, people come together. They don't talk and wonder what church you go to. Are you a liberal or are you a conservative? All right, because they have community. And they come together. I think there's probably, I would bet right now in Miles City, Montana, a town of about 8,500, there are two different museum events going on. There's a bluegrass festival. There's a couple of community auction type things for people in need. I mean, all that's this weekend. But I mean, all the time, there's something else I'm missing too. A pro-life banquet tonight for a pregnancy, crisis center. All of this stuff going on, and for me, not being able to, go to a lot of these things, how I give back is through my writing. See, I really consider that part of my ministry there, and it's not always, Christian. It's honoring. Now, the thing is, the more you honor somebody, the more honorable you become. The more honorable you become, that transmits out into your writing. But if you're going to be writing literary selfies all the time, this is what I did, this is how I saw it, and isn't my puppy cute, and isn't my cat cute, and blah, 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 that selfishness starts getting into the story. It's a spirit, okay, it's an attitude, it's like I talked last week, tone, atmosphere. You're setting this atmosphere, and whenever we do that, we become smaller. We become smaller, and our gift becomes smaller yet. All right? Our gift becomes bigger and makes room for us the more we give it away. The more you try and hang on to your gift for your own selfish purposes, you become a smaller person, okay? And the gift will start diminishing.
Amen. 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 Okay. Take a break. Get a drink. Let's see what we got going on over here. Let's see. I know that everybody's talking. I'm just trying to find where they're talking. Here we go. Let me turn this down a little bit. Now I'm getting some comments. Honor not glorified, love of original history. Katie Androsky and Zena Hermes are watching with us. Becky McClendon says it's not all me. Beverly Cunningham says our local paper has been bought by a large conglomerate, and that happens so often.
That's standard anymore.
Yeah. Becky's agreeing with you and repeating some of the things that you're saying. Tithe on your talent. People want to know about their people and so forth. Yes. Literary selfies. Becky says, oh. Yes. Thank you so much. And while John is taking a break, I want to mention again, and I'll say it again at the end if I remember, if you have questions about writing in general, writing as a novelist, writing as a feature writer, What is it that you might have a question about? It might be about any of the 3 visits we've already enjoyed with, well, the 2 and today visits from John, but it may be about something more broad. And he would be glad to come back and do a question and answer program. So if you will send in your questions live and or after the replay, if you're watching this, and either one, they're applicable. And if we have enough, we'll do another one. Please send in your questions. Thank you, John.
Okay, I want to jump on that one comment because I was prepared for it. And that is how the small local paper is taken over by a chain. And most newspapers are chains, all right? And those chains originate somewhere else. Even this Miles City paper here is actually the largest paper in a 11 paper chain. And the owner does not live, I mean, he's about 250 miles away, but he'll set the tone for everything.
Yeah.
All right, and that's the problem. At least he lives in Montana. But a lot of them are owned by chains out of Chicago, out of Iowa, out of back east, and they set the tone. Now, here's why it's so important to go out there and do these things, because what the world is trying to do, all right, what the enemy is trying to do through the worldly system is fragment and divide, all right? And he does that by forcing us into tribalism instead of community. And in tribalism, it's just my tribe against your tribe. And I explained in, I think last week, how a lot of indigenous people, their term for themselves was people, the people. If you translate, the tongue for their tribe meant the people. And that wasn't just cute. That meant everybody else wasn't a person. So you could kill them indiscriminately. And that was true of Native Americans, all right? There was a lot of Native American tribes. They called themselves the people, but they literally thought that the other tribes that they were competing with were dogs and could be killed and, treated like dogs. It's not common, it's not taught in a lot of our history books, And that's another thing, when you get into this research, you'll find out that most of what you're taught is not true. And you'll have to determine if you're going to expose that or not, whether you can take that heat, and you better be fairly strong, and you better have good basis and a foundation under you. Don't be, if you're going to write features, do not try and be an investigative journalist, all right? It'll make a fool of you. Good investigative journalists are born that way. They're trained in the craft. Now, you might become one eventually, but it's going to take years. Don't think, I'm going to be an investigative journalist. No, that, again, the focus is probably on you. I'm going to become something, all right? So instead, look for people you can honor. Look for people that have walked in quiet integrity. My rule, number 1, avoid anybody who really wants to talk to you.
Okay.
Avoid those people who want publicity. Because, first of all, they're probably liars. Second of all, they probably conned 10 or 12 other writers into writing about them. So it's nothing new or unique. But anybody really wanting the publicity, and they kind of have a sales approach, avoid those people. Look for those people who sort of want to talk, but they're a little suspicious of you. And you have to sell them.
Yeah.
You have to show them that you're trustworthy. Then you learn how to interview. I learned how to do it. I was natural at it, but I had to learn the craft of interviewing and how to bring people to a certain point to where they'll say something, open up to something that really, don't ever think you've captured it, because you've probably got another 5 minutes it's going to take you to where you really do capture it. Right? Because there's a nugget in there that you got to get your hands on.
Yes.
And it might surprise the person when they even say it. I've had people just go, wow, I haven't thought of that in years, and something breaks forth. That's the entire story.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a treasure hunt, and it's fun.
Yes.
All right. Now, if you got somebody that wants to be interviewed, they're just going to feed you a line of bull, and you're shoveling manure the whole time. I mean, that's all you're doing, trying to, and you got to check your sources. You can be fooled. And so you can't just take everybody at their word. Ask somebody, ask a neighbor. If it's somebody in your church, ask somebody, is he credible? You know, don't be afraid to kind of, because it's embarrassing to print something and then find out the guy was a total fraud.
Yes.
All right. And you lose your credibility, you know, when you do that. Now, the other thing, if you're a novelist, and this is the position I'm in, if you really get into this, it will add to your novel, but if you cross the line, it'll drain your energy and take your time away. You can use all of this to collect and fill up. All writers have to write from a deep well, all right? And you have to spend time creating that well. If you're leading the shallow life and you're just flitting around and you think you're going to collect stuff up here and write, you're going to have a shallow book. You know, we got plenty of them. We don't need any more. There's only so much kindling required. All right. You know, we need some meat and potatoes. We need some depth of soul. And that's done by digging down deep and putting stuff in deep and get past your little raw nerves. We've got so many wimpy writers. Don't write out of your hurt feelings, because that makes you not concentrating again on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that victimhood spills out into the story. And about half the readers are going to say, I don't need to be depressed. All right. I don't need to, I don't need to be a shoulder for this writer to cry on. Okay. You know, she should have cried her way out. He should have wailed his way out, whatever, and come to me with a pure and honest heart, maybe discussing those things, but discussing them with an answer, not with a complaint.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Here's a key point that I have to say about inspiration.
Okay.
Most great ideas are bad ideas. Or at least most great ideas simply aren't even good ideas. Again, this gets back to where the Christian just seems to lack discernment. Worldly people don't have this problem as much. I mean, the real megalomaniacs do. You know, the real maniacal types, you know, they might. But because Christians have, you know, an unseen world and an invisible God and the Holy Spirit, we have to learn to find out if our ideas really are from God. Are they just from us? Or maybe from the enemy. You never know.
That's
Usually
right.
the enemy's not that involved because, you know, we're not that important in some of this. I'm not saying he's not involved, but so let's say you get this idea. Well, if it's coming from like here to here, you know, where you get this energy and it goes, wow, that's a great idea. That'll probably go nowhere. All right. You got to kill those little puppies. All right. Because more homes have been ruined, more banks have been emptied by people with great ideas. And if you talk to a good investment banker or even talk to your local banker, they couldn't give a rip about great ideas if you were coming in for a loan. They invest in people, solely in people. They invest in character, reputation, track record, all of those things. The idea thing, they'll leave that up to you. But most ideas are not such great ideas because they're just one of those things, you know, like the cartoon bubble and the little light bulb goes, you know, and then you go to the next panel and it's gone. Now, if you try and go back, never treat stories or your career or any of this like a balloon. You see the balloon and then you look down and it's deflated. So you grab it and you just, you know, you keep blowing air into something, trying to make it big. And it'll either pop or you'll lose your grip and it'll, all right? So don't try and blow something up on your own power. If the idea is good, it'll be resonating solidly in you from here to here, all right? Yes. From your chin down to about your belly button. It'll take root down in there, and it'll grow like a baby, and it'll start kicking, you know, and it'll want its way out. You don't have to blow air into it. I've had, my whole life, you know, my writing life now, which 49 years as a professional writer. Wow. And I've had so many people come to me, almost anymore because I'm a hermit. I live in the Badlands with the coyotes and the badgers. I don't get as many, but they still seek you out, you know, and they'll always come up to you and say, my life would make a great story. And I've heard this so many times, you know, I've got my own, I kind of like a Rolodex of pat answers. And I say, yes, if Hemingway wrote it, your life would make a great story. All right. Mm-hmm. But one of the classics, a guy came to me, and this was a believer. And he says, I got a great idea for a book. Here's the deal. I'll give you the idea. You write it, and we'll split the money. And I thought, you know, that just takes the cake. I mean, that is the winner. But you have those people that either have the ego so bad that they want, why? Because they don't have eternity in their heart. Their life is fading away. They want to believe that it amounted to something. And they want to use you as a mercenary, basically, to sell that, you know, to everybody else. That, yeah, he did lead a decent life, or he led a life worth mentioning, because they know on the tombstone, you're not going to have a 90,000 word book on your tombstone, right? So they want something like that. Preachers can be really bad in this regard because they fall in love with their own sermons, and they get to thinking, oh, this should be a book. So, you know, if I die, this will be there for everybody to remember. Yeah. Well, narcissism, they are focusing on them. You know, the best message about preaching I've ever heard, and I'll get off this lest I offend, you know, all the preachers listening, which probably aren't any, but was by Garrison Keillor, of all people. And I'm going to have to turn around and read this, all right? Because I keep a couple of things taped here as a reminder. Here's what Garrison Keillor said. When a minister stands in front of the people, he is interrupting what the people have come to church for. He had better have a good reason for doing that. Otherwise, he shouldn't stand up there and talk.
Huh.
Powerful. All right. Yeah. From Garrison Keillor. Well, as Christian writers, we have to say that same thing. See, people aren't worried about investing $15 in your book. They're worried about investing 10 hours. 8 hours, 6 hours, whatever it takes, because it's time that's always more important. It's time that you spend with people, with your children, that's more important. Yeah. And I've never mentioned this, and I'm the only person I know that's ever talked on it, but get out of the mindset that time is money. All right, get out of that entire worldly concept when it comes to your writing and everything else, because then you're making yourself bigger than your gift again. Realize that money is time. All right, now stop and think about that. If you're saying time is money, you're really making money bigger than time, and everything is about the money. But what is money? Money is simply a representation of labor and resources. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Labor is time, and resources have to grow or develop, so they're time. Mm-hmm. So really, all money is an exchange of time. And we're eternal, all right? And if God has a purpose in my life, He has given me the time to do it. I don't have to rush Him. I'm not going to provoke Him, all right? But if He has given me the purpose, then He's given me the time. Amen. If I get money involved in it, see, then I'm diminishing my gift again. Mm-hmm. All right, we need money. Money's honorable. It's the love of money that isn't. Mm-hmm. Okay? So all of that's valuable, but we have to get our eyes off career. We have to get our eyes off promotion and ambition and get it on that ministry and that freedom of letting the horses run. If you're an artist, you have horses in your chest that want to break free and gallop. And that's the greatest part of writing. It's not the reviews. All right? These are all reviews that I've collected through the years, or at least some of them. It's not about the reviews, because these will burn up someday. It's the joy of letting those horses run, getting it out, the joy of being who God made you to be, yes. And then affecting lives. Yes. You know, somehow touching a life. Now, getting back briefly to how papers and everything have changed and how I've tried to adjust, and I'm not adjusting very well. My local paper came today with this headline, And it says that this magazine, Montana Magazine, is discontinuing after 50 years.
Oh.
All right. Now, that's happening to a lot of print publications. You know, they're folding up and dying. When I first started, I was reviewed in there several times by a great book reviewer. Not everybody's a book reviewer. That's a craft. Just because you write books doesn't mean you have any ability to review books, okay? I only have reviewed maybe 4 or 5 in my whole career because I don't consider myself a book reviewer. But early on, I get reviews where it says, this is out of my first, the self-published version of The Breaking of Ezra Riley. Moore is a writer whose work is art and literature, not just descriptive information about a way of life that has romantic attraction for many. Read it, not because it's about ranch life, but because it's about people who are deeply human first, and ranchers and cowboys by avocation. The Breaking of Ezra Riley is startling in its intensity and honesty. It is, too, a portrait of conflict that is remarkable for its clarity and lucidity. And he goes on and on. Now, that's my first self-published novel by a professor emeritus who is reviewing this. Great stuff. And he would review books like most of them do. He puts his top-rated book first in the column of reviews. He might review 4, 5, 6, and it goes down. And through the years, I was reviewed above some of the greatest writers in America.
Interesting.
All right. But
Cool.
I bring this up, you know, not to laud me, because this is so long ago. I can't hardly tap into that. But you get back to this headline, that this magazine is folding after 50 years. Now, what happened is this book reviewer called me up and wanted to actually travel. And it's, you know, from where he lived, it was a long ways. You know, it was a 6-hour drive in Montana. And interviewed me for the magazine. And it was going to be later that summer. Unfortunately, he contracted a very quick brain cancer and he passed away. Oh. Right? And that I shouldn't repeat too much of that because you might be afraid to talk to me. Because I've had so many of those things, you know, kind of things happen. Well, a new reviewer came in, okay, younger, and out of the university influenced communities in Montana, the liberal artsy-fartsy types, all right? I was never reviewed again. I wrote several more books. They never reviewed me once.
Wow.
All right? Because that's where you really see some of the censorship is not in some of the stories they write, but some of the things they don't write about. So yes. I went that far, never reviewed again. Now, last year in that magazine, a writer from New York did a story about a famous Montana lady bronc rider from like 1910, 1920s era. And I'm reading it. And I'm wondering why, you know, this guy from Boston is writing about a Montana lady bronc rider. And he mentions that her claim to fame was that her broncs were never hobbled. She never rode a hobbled horse. And I thought, what in the world are you talking about? I mean, I've spent my life around bucking horses and cowboys and cattle in the West. And the key, what he missed here, is some of the early lady bronc riders hobbled their stirrups. There was a rope leading from one stirrup under the horse's belly to the other stirrup. Yeah. And she didn't, see, because you can grip and hold on better, and you're not required to spur. See, the spurring action is what gets you points in bronc riding. And they said, well, ladies don't have to spur. They don't have to move their legs, you know, from the point of a shoulder up to the cantle of the saddle. They can just grip. And these stirrups will be tied together, you know, so it's an advantage to them. And some of the best lady bronc riders says, no, we want the same rules as the men. And so what he should have figured out and researched was they were riding hobbled. She refused to ride a hobbled stirrup, all right? So they know so little about rural people, the West, or any of this. They saw hobbled and didn't take it any further. Yeah. All right. So it became a hobbled horse. I can tell you that would be dangerous. You don't want to ride a hobbled bucking horse. It would tip over and fall and roll with you.
Uh-huh.
It's very dangerous, all right? But why didn't the editor catch that?
Mm-hmm.
See, the editor should have read that because they don't have fact checkers like they used to.
Yeah.
One thing that impressed me when I wrote for the New York Times Magazine that time, they had the most thorough fact checkers. They called every night, not just me, but people mentioned in the story, and checked out every detail. Magazines have completely lost that because they're cutting staff, and they're relying on word apps, computer applications, just thinking that these things will always tell the truth. Now, let me throw out one last thing, then I'll let me take a breath.
Okay.
But let me throw this out. I don't write science fiction per se. I've written one apocalyptic novel, The Land of Empty Houses. But I can tell you that we are coming to a new Tower of Babel, to where technology pretty soon is going to pierce the veil and enter into the spiritual realm. And when that happens, our only immunity is the Holy Spirit. And that is where I see all of this going, because what the world working, through the enemy is working against us is to break down community, until we're a tribalism that wars, until one unifying force can come in and unify us around something, right? Mm-hmm. But community is really the root of humanity. No community, no humanity. Where is the humanity found and expressed? The local, regional feature story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm taking it all in. I've got a question, but I'm not going to ask it yet. I'm going to go check Facebook. Let's see. What do we've got here? Becky McClendon says Ezra Riley is a powerful part of our lives. Melinda Inman says, yes, the censorship of Christian writers by secular publication review journals is real. Excuse me. I wish that wasn't true, but I've heard too many authors tell harrowing stories. Let me check here. Here we go. 76 comments, and I can see 4.
Well, those are the 4 of the good ones. Yeah.
I'm not sure how it helps Facebook to tell me that I'm going to have so many comments, because it's not going to show them to me. So looking on my phone, yes, a lot of people repeating the quality, the lines that you are getting, the truths that you are sharing. And there are more, and it will not show them to me, and I'm just apologize. I'm not in charge of that. I can't control it. It's a technology thing. So please feel free to continue talking amongst yourselves when we get off, when this episode ends in a few little few minutes. Ask questions that you may have about what we're talking about today, what we talked about in the first or the second episode, or should I say Visit with John. And if you haven't seen those yet, I already have them already ready. I'm going to copy and paste them and put them right above the video as soon as we get finished talking today. So I'm hearing you say, John, that, let me get back over to you. I'm hearing you say, help me make sure that I'm hearing correctly. If writers have that impetus to be thoroughly correct in every way, their facts, their grammar, and so forth, and then they go and they tell stories about people that are in their areas, and they look at the tone and the atmosphere, and they capture that and the details, and they confirm their facts, and they do all of the things that not only a reporter would do, but a good feature writer would do, human interest writer would do. Mm-hmm. Then when they take all of that skill and those habits and those good practices, and they apply it to their writing or building a ministry or writing a nonfiction book, their well is deeper. They've got more skills, more knowledge, and they're a better writer.
Yep.
No matter what they do.
Well, a key here, and you're a good example, and you're going to learn and grow in this, is how to interview people, how to engage people. I've been interviewed quite a bit, all right, because of my career. Yeah. And I mean, it's really it's really a interesting experience, to be a veteran, newsman of any sort, feature writer, and then having somebody interview you, because I'll sit there and thinking, good Lord, can we go deeper? Can we go deeper than this? And I don't want to give them the questions to ask. I mean, that breaks the rules. But I've been interviewed enough that I found there aren't very many people who know how to interview. Now, as you learn to interview people, guess what? As a novelist, you'll learn how to interview your own characters.
Oh, that is good.
It's important. And most writers don't learn that because they're not dealing with the real world. All right? They're taking their little literary selfie, and all of these little characters are just characters in their head, usually. You can pattern it against people, use people for patterns and everything, and I do. But for the most part, you have to get out in the world in order to have well-rounded characters in your books. And nothing to me, and I think Christian literature has been guilty of this for so long. And when you see an exception, it just radiates, all right? Mm-hmm. Flat characters. We're so concerned about it being clean. Well, it should be. Mine are. About it being decent. Well, it should be. Mine are. And we want the moral of the story out there. Okay, well, that should be implied, and that should be discovered by the reader, not by you cramming it down their throat.
Okay.
All right. But what do people really love about a novel? Now, I did a poll, of my readers here a couple of years ago and say, what do you read fiction for? Why do you read? What are you looking for? And I was really blessed by the people who are good readers, by what they said. Most of them want to learn something new that they didn't know. That a lot of those said that. Most of them said they want to meet interesting people in the books.
That's a great quote, isn't it?
The fictional people that you introduce them to have to be interesting people.
Yeah.
Okay. Now they can be flawed and they can be good or bad, but they can't be stereotypically good and stereotypically bad. And they can't do like a couple of my friends have done recently. And I felt really bad. The one guy spent years on his novel, and the woman that wrote two excellent books and is a friend of mine, and they both did the same thing. They had protagonists that weren't likable.
Mm-hmm.
All right? They just weren't likable. Now, they're not going to be likable also if they're not well-rounded, because a protagonist isn't known just by what they do. All right? They're not just action heroes.
Yes.
All right? But who they are. Character. What is character? I mean, the characters have to have character. I mean, it all just comes together. You got to understand that. It's not what they do, but it's who they are. And for the writer, it boils down to that. It's not what I've produced. All right. We all go through that stage, and you get the awards. We want to see what a Montana feature writing award looks like?
Yes.
Here's two of them.
Oh, Bill Buckles! Oh my goodness!
That's how Western we are. These are for feature writing. Now, just whoops, this one's upside down. Okay. Now, granted, these happen to be for rodeo journalism.
Oh, okay.
How cool is that?
That's pretty cool.
These are handmade by a wonderful Christian lady, a silversmith, and Coors is on there because they sponsored it. So, and I don't wear these around. I don't go to a rodeo wearing this because somebody might not be able to read it, and they'll see the saddle bronc, and they'll say, "Well, what saddle bronc did you? What title did you win? What was the best saddle bronc you ever rode?" And I said, "Well, it was a desk chair, and I was furring a laptop."
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! This has been so helpful to me, and I know that it has been helpful to the audience and the future audience as well, to tie this together with your entire presentation, and tying it together with how it benefits us in our skills and our abilities, develops them further or deeper or richer, so that we can then serve both our characters and our audience on a deeper level. Is that what I'm hearing?
One thing that I'll wrap this up with is if you can write features about, obviously, if you stress honor too much, that'll get in your way. All of this should be subtle, should be nuanced. You let the story do the honoring. You don't go right out, right away say, I am honoring this person. Okay.
I see.
And you have to be careful about if you're doing it in a certain communal setting that you aren't upsetting somebody who wants to be honored. I mean, there'll always be jealousy and stuff. So all of that can fit in. But anything from the back of a church bulletin to your blog to a web page to who knows what, shoppers, community shoppers and stuff. They often have ads. They have holes. What we, in news world, we say they have a hole, and they'll try and just put fillers in. Well, why not you be the filler, and you're going to go around and interview people? Now, rather than use honor as a motivating thing, think about exhibiting examples of common sense, because we are living in a world sadly devoid of it. And it was, Will Rogers said probably back in the 1920s that the only problem with common sense is it is not very common. And we're nearly 100 years past when he said that. So another thing that you can just look for is where you can tell people need examples of healthy, constructive living. We have reality shows on TV that have nothing to do with reality. We have people that are literally stoned on video games. They're addicted to video games. Nobody knows reality. All right. So if you have a way of presenting a message that shows grit, determination, commitment, all grounded in common sense, so that people can be retrained in the concept of common sense.
Wise words. Wise words. We appreciate you taking the time. I know that it's getting more and more difficult with the season that we're going into, with your duties at ranching and your writing schedule. So,
well, we are very technological out here. We're a little further behind, but I just want to tell people the horses in the Pony Express are getting faster. All right. So we are catching up. And I want to give you an example here. You see what this is? Right.
No.
What? Huh? Can you tell what that is?
It looks like a telephone, old-timey telephone.
No. All right. Now watch. Flip phone. Flip phones. I might be old-fashioned, you see, but I have a flip phone now.
You must be a grandfather, because that's a
grandfather
joke. That is definitely a grandfather joke. Viewers, I'm going to remind you one more time, not to beat a dead horse, but I'm just going to say it again. Do you have a question? Do you have a question about writing, whether you're fiction or nonfiction, whether you are writing biographies, whether you want to move to another publishing house? What is it that you would like to know about? Send us a question. We will not respond right away. We will gather them in hopes that we will have enough to have yet one more program. John and I are going to visit for just a few minutes after we get off with you, and we will be right back as soon as we can be in a few minutes to share those resources with you and answer questions that we can, but we're not going to answer all the questions because we want to save them for another program. Thank you so much for joining me, Mr. John L. Moore.
Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure. Always. Thank you, viewers, for being here with us. We're almost not quite at an hour and a half. We appreciate so much that you are so interested and so committed to your writing, that with someone of John's quality has the time to spend that kind of time with us, then you are with us. We appreciate that. You're why we're here. This has been Marketers on a Mission, episode number 135, How Feature Writing Can Help Us Portray Men and Women of Honor, with guest author John L. Moore. We've got even more fantastic guests next week, because we're here every weekday, 12 Pacific, 3 Eastern. This program is designed for you, with you specifically in mind, helping you learn the craft of writing from professional writers, and then how to take what you learn to market your message online, because the bulk of your audience is online. We must learn these skills. Thank you for being here with John Moore. I'm Patricia Durgan, and we will see you next week.